Hello everyone, it's Jay, and today I'm going to be talking about how Kittie and Otep redefined rock and metal. Now, this isn't a hit piece or a way to objectify women in rock and metal, but it is more to shed some light on sexism in that very genre. This is also to showcase the forefront members who paved the way for some type of respect amongst the community. But if you happen to like my content, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let's get into the video. Women in rock and metal had always been a thing, but it never really had that spotlight like it was supposed to, especially in the mid to late 20th century. A lot of that had to do with not being taken too seriously, mainly because they were women in rock and roll, which to me is honestly a bit frustrating because there are a lot of female fronted bands that are crazy talented. Two examples of this that I can think of would be Heart whenever they made Barracuda in the 70s, which eventually this song made its way onto Guitar Hero. And the other example would be Joan Jett whenever she made I Love Rock and Roll. That song ended up being on Guitar Hero as well. These two artists in that time period were crazy talented. I mean, Barracuda hit 11th on Billboard, and I Love Rock and Roll peaked at number 2. But these two artists sadly were not taken seriously enough amongst the rock community. And in return, the push for a new narrative in rock and roll and metal had stopped. Fast forward to the 90s when grunge, nu metal, and pop punk hit the scene. And we start to see diversity within the rock and metal culture. We had artists like Gwen and her band No Doubt that pushed more of the pop punk era. Gwen even had a song with Sublime called Saw Red, and many more songs with them as well. And one thing I do want to touch on is that even then, people were not taking Gwen seriously. Some were saying she was an industry plant, even though she was slowly changing the scene and actually caring about the music. But for me, what really changed the game and made the wave in rock and metal was whenever Kittie stepped on the scene in the late 90s. With their hit album Spit, they were able to tour with Slipknot and redefined rock and metal. They definitely fit in the genre of nu metal, but with vocals similar to Slipknot, they would change the scene forever. And to this day, people still imitate them a lot. Just look at Lucifena, for example. Or another example would be Baby Got. One thing that you can tell is that they took a big influence from Kittie, especially vocal wise and marketing wise. Around that time of Kittie's success in 2000, a new band called Otep would emerge. And together, these two bands would create the future of rock and metal. A lot of people would take the styling cues of what Kittie had created as well as the marketing standpoint. And then a lot of people would take cues from Otep and their vocal range and what they were speaking. Arch Enemy is also a group to mention because they also made an impact. More on Otep, this band was more melodic and poetic nu metal and pushed the wave of anti-government and speaking abuse towards women. This type of reach would influence bands later on through the years. Two examples of this would be the song Rise, Rebel, Resist and Jonestown Tea. Rise, Rebel, Resist would talk about resisting the authority of the government or just men in general, while Jonestown Tea spoke about SA in family affairs. Otep was so popular about speaking dark subjects for women that they were able to go on to an HBO special called Deaf Poetry in the early 2000s.
It was his fist into her side.
This would in return push a new wave for women in rock and metal and also create a whole new influence. Now, I know I talked more about Otep and how they changed the game, and a lot of that has to do with my cousin and her influence towards my musical taste. I became such a big fan of Otep in the late 2000s because of my cousin, but also because of what they were speaking. They were pushing such a narrative in rock and metal that you could tell how much of it was changing. These two groups would influence metal so much that it reshaped the genre forever. You started to see bands like Straight Line Stitch, Arch Enemy, Paramore, In This Moment, The Birthday Massacre, Ginger, and even modern trap metal artist Lucifena, as well as Baby Goth, emerge in the scene. If it wasn't for these powerful women pushing a new narrative in rock and metal and taking shit for it, we wouldn't have these amazing artists today. Now, this will be the end of my video. The 90s and the 2000s were definitely a win for women in rock and metal, but it took so long to get the respect that previous artists had deserved. And a lot of that had to do with just sexism in rock and roll, but also women not being taken seriously enough, which to me is just dumb because there are a lot of creative people in this world, and I really think that people should be taken more seriously. But if you happen to like my content, like I said in the beginning, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'm out.